our speakers and chairman for today. It's without them that we certainly wouldn't have a conference, and we certainly wouldn't have the engaging sessions that I think we're all looking forward to hearing from today. And obviously, as attendees and delegates, thank you for choosing to attend this year's Biotech and Money. I certainly hope it lives up to your expectations. Also, we'd like to thank our sponsors for this event. Again, without their support, the event wouldn't be where it is here today. You'll notice that they are dotted around the speaker faculty today, so we look forward to hearing from their executives in speaking positions and also in chairmanship positions. And obviously, we have their rotating slides again, so thank you very much for your support of this year's event. You'll notice that you were handed your documentation pack this morning. It carries all of the sessions that take place through the course of today and tomorrow, and all of the networking and refreshment breaks. Please do keep this in your person. If you do lose it, just come and grab an extra copy from the registration desk. And obviously, more importantly as well, we're delighted that we're launching the report that has been, I guess, commissioned by a large number of our community followers and supporters. And one of the main reasons of putting forward this morning's session is to help promote that report and to give the opportunity for many of the stakeholders to come on stage and talk about that. But obviously, I would like to hand over to my co-founder, Terry O'Dwyer, who'll give you a very quick intro to that session and obviously welcome on the participants. But again, on behalf of Biotech and Money, delighted to see you here, and hope you have a great experience today.
Thank you. And as Neil says, I am the other half of Biotech and Money, and I'd like to extend my own welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us and supporting this initiative. Our mission at Biotech and Money is to enable and facilitate better and smarter deal-making, funding, and financing so that the industry can grow to its full potential. With this in mind, last year we invited a cohort of some of the UK's leading life science CEOs and stakeholders to a Chatham House Rules discussion. The goal was simple. It was to share ideas and brainstorm solutions to the industry's funding, financing, and investment challenges. We asked some broad and difficult questions. What are the catalysts and inhibitors to growing UK healthcare investment? What could CEOs and industry leaders do that wasn't already being done? What will persuade more investors to choose UK healthcare opportunities? I'm not going to pretend we came up with all the answers in the discussion, but it became apparent very quickly in the debate that there existed a huge disconnect between the realities of the sector and investor perceptions. There existed, we believed, a wealth of misinformation, misconceptions, and myths that pervaded the investor community about investment in UK healthcare. In other words, there was a view that there was an education and information gap, and a consensus that a better and clearer case needed to be made for UK healthcare investment. It is with this in mind the CEOs in the sector conspired with us to produce this report we are launching today. It makes the case with hard-hitting facts, case studies and deep analysis about the attractiveness of UK healthcare opportunities, and it is indeed a rallying cry to the wider financial community to support the UK's healthcare and life sciences sectors. Biotech and Money is extremely proud to be acting as the vehicle for this endeavour. A huge thanks must go to the over 30 CEOs who have endorsed this report, to contributors including Neil Woodford, the BIA, the London Stock Exchange, EY, Imperial Innovations, and the Minister for Life Sciences, to our report author Liz Klein, and particularly to Darrin Disley of Horizon and Peter George of Clinigen, without whose vociferous support it would not have been possible. Now, to discuss the themes emerging from this report, we've assembled a terrific panel, and to introduce them to you and begin our first session of the day, I'd like to introduce a lead partner of Biotech and Money, Ernst & Young's Head of Life Sciences, David McMurchy.
I think you missed an opportunity when you said you were the other half. You could have said the better-looking half on behalf of all follically challenged men. On which note, Peter, can I ask you to come and join us? I think it would be much better to hear from them than me. So, Peter, why don't you introduce yourself in less than 30 seconds?
Well, as you can tell, it's only hair that I'm challenged in, nothing else. So I'm the CEO of Clinigen Group, and we provide access to medicines on a global basis. So where patients have problems getting access to medicines, whether we own them, whether we're doing them on behalf of third parties, our job is to make sure that patients, wherever they need access to medicines, we provide that access to the medicines. So that's Clinigen Group.
Very good, thank you. And next I'm going to invite, and I can't see him, so I'm assuming Darrin is somewhere. There he is.
He is hiding.
Lovely. Darrin, you also have 30 seconds.
Okay, so Darrin Disley, entrepreneur in normally people tell I'm loud enough as it is. Okay, so I'm Darrin Disley, the CEO of Horizon Discovery Group. Horizon is very much involved in this area. You're seeing a lot in newspapers at the moment in terms of human gene editing. We've been doing this for nearly a decade now. We effectively have two prongs to the business. We're providing research tools to enable people to understand genetic drivers of disease, and the second focus is in enabling pharmaceutical companies to develop medicines that are targeted to the genetic drivers, whether they be small molecules, gene therapies, cell therapies. We supply the underlying technology that enables that.
Very good. It was almost bang on time as well. Thank you. Next, I would like to invite Russ to come and join us. Again, same for you, Russ. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Russ Cummings, Chief Executive of Imperial Innovations. Imperial Innovations creates, builds and invests in companies based on great UK science. As the name suggests, we started in life by working with Imperial College, but in 3 or 4 years ago we broadened out and started working with Cambridge, Oxford, UCL and some of the other universities in and around London. And we now are listed and last year invested around £60 million into UK companies.
Very good, thank you, Russ. And Elizabeth, next.
Liz Klein. I've been an analyst in the city for about 15 years, top rated in the XDL survey for a good number of those, and Starmine Healthcare Stock Picker of the Year twice. I have founded my own business, which is involved in helping the biotech community, either companies or organisations, to help to access the city better. And I was asked to write this report, which was great fun.
Very good, thank you. And finally, we will be joined, though she's running slightly late. Catherine can't join us today, but Cailin McGurk will be joining us from JP Morgan. But I think I'm right in saying she went to the wrong venue, and will be here very soon. So bless. Right. So let's start with, if you look at the report, and for those of you who had a chance to read it or skim it, it starts with our most wonderful advocate George Freeman writing how wonderful the UK opportunity is. He says that the UK can compete confidently in global markets. Without sounding like a school teacher, discuss. And Liz, as you were, you can go first as you put together the report.
Thank you. Well, I think the UK has a number of very important foundations which make it quite unique. We have the NHS, and I know a lot of people diss the NHS, but it's great. It means that we have a really supportive medical community where we can sell medicines. I'm sure Peter will talk about the NHS in a bit more detail. But also we have a place to do clinical trials and to access information about a community. Second, and probably an even more important foundation, is that we have some of the best universities in the world in life sciences. In fact, if you look at the top 100, we probably have the second best, and certainly Imperial, Oxford and Cambridge, to name just 3 of them, are consistently in the top 10 universities in the world. That gives us an excellent community of science. The third foundation is we have a large pharmaceutical sector. Glaxo and AstraZeneca, 2 of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, who have research bases here, who have supported research and who are investing as well in UK life science, which is critically important. So those 3 platforms are the foundation of the biotech house. And then we have some very supportive investors and great management, all of which, in my opinion, combine to make the UK a really attractive opportunity for people to invest in.
Very good. Let me just pause for a moment. Please come and join us. We've done your introduction already.
Thank you. I'm so sorry I'm late.
No problem.
Good morning, everybody.
Can you give us a 30-second intro?
Absolutely. Good morning. Again, apologies for the tardiness. Cailin McGurk from JP Morgan. I'm an executive director in the healthcare coverage team. I've been with JP Morgan for 11 years and have actually over the years had the opportunity to work with some very interesting UK-based life sciences companies, and hopefully a lot more here today and much more to come. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. So let's go, Peter. You got a mention there from Liz. So, is it all good?
I think it is. I think you can go back a bit further as to why the UK does well in a global environment. And there's a number of things. Why does the UK punch above its weight anyway in the global environment, which we do? Because we got the English language. Because I think the UK industry and sector and finance sector is seen as being trusted and ethical, and those things rub off on the pharmaceutical environment. We do a lot of clinical trials, a lot of innovation, a lot of development, and those are the things that help Clinigen. We do business in 120 countries around the world. Only less than 5% of our revenues are UK based, and because we're seen as being an ethical, trusted provider, I think a lot of that's to do with the fact that we are a British company, and we should use those things. And one of the reasons we started this whole process is that we have a tendency to fall back on that great British trait of being sarcastic and negative about ourselves, whereas the Americans have that great trait of selling themselves up. We sell ourselves down, and the purpose of this whole thing started with me and Darrin saying, why don't we stop selling ourselves down and start selling ourselves up? And that's part of what we're trying to do today. And I think we've got some great examples in that report of why we should be selling ourselves up.
Very good. Russ, anything to add?
Well, and I'll just echo the point about the UK science base and the quality and richness that we've got here. It is an equal to or better than the Boston or the California area in many metrics in terms of quality of research, patents, IP, and yet the number of companies and the quantum of capital flowing into those is a small fraction by comparison. So I know it's a high-level review, but on that basis we're barely scratching the surface. I think what is different now than 10 years ago or 20 years ago is the continuity of capital. I'm not saying capital is freely available, because I know it's still incredibly tough and challenging for young early-stage companies to raise capital. But now there are investors around. We are just one example, but there are others too that are now providing a continuity of capital to those businesses so they can get further with less financial risk than might have been the case 10 or 20 years ago. So I think things have changed, and I hope that's a permanent change of part of our ecosystem.
Very good. So you touched on capital there, and Darrin, we were talking before, and you tried to explain to me about vertical, horizontal investment. And do you want to build on that from a capital point of view?
Absolutely. But I'm just going to sort of come back to that. I mean, like most things, the answer already exists, right? If everything took to its end point, we know the answers to what has to happen. And if you look at investing, I invested in 30-odd companies in the last couple of years, and you look at three things, really. Is there a market? Is there great people? And is there technology to address the market? So if we look at that, we've got 11% of all life science innovation coming out of the UK in a population that has under 1% of the world's population. We have an abundance of science. The market is huge. I mean, if you look at the end point of human healthcare in the future, there will be a drug to every genetic driver. They'll be working by all types of mechanisms, whether it be immunotherapies, cell therapies, gene therapies, etc. And it'll be linking that through diagnostics to patients to give them a personalized treatment. That exists. The rest is just a matter of applying technology, developing that, translating it, and getting it through to solving those problems. So the issue really has got to be the money piece. So you've got this early stage drive now that's, all the investment release for angel investment, etc. That's coming. You've got excellent funds now that are joined up in their thinking, like Imperial, Oxford, Cambridge Innovation Capital, Mercier, etc., whose job is to pull those angel funding things along, investing in all the key verticals that are going to support the solutions for this horizontal healthcare sort of paradigm that's emerging. The one thing that I think is still struggling is the translation into the larger amounts of capital, whether it be Series C or the rare Series D rounds, and into the public markets. And there are very few funds, Russ is being one of them, that could do those kinds of rounds. And Horizon certainly had that issue. Do we stay private? Ideally, we probably went public too early. We'd have liked to have had a 30, 40 million pound Series D round, but that wasn't available to us, so we went public and had to do all of our acquisitions and everything in the public eye. So I think that translation there, and that comes as a problem, I really think. I think the education level of our public markets is poor, to be quite frank, and there's a number of fold. That one is the people who fund managers aren't necessarily equipped to understand the science and technology, and then I think from the analyst sector there's a relatively small number of analysts, and many have been around, sorry Liz, for quite some time, and we need some of the younger guys. You look at someone like a Paul Cudden, was a research scientist, then translated into the city, and we need more of those people coming in who can actually really translate these modern concepts of genomic medicine and various things like this to investors and make them attracted to invest in the sector.
Very good, thank you. Cailin, from a capital point of view, UK versus US, what direction are we travelling in? How's it feeling? How does it look? What are your views on that?
Thank you. Very good question, and I think the answer would have been somewhat different maybe 12 months ago versus what it is now. I think the volatility that we've seen over the last couple of weeks has maybe made, I think, particularly some of the European companies where I think the US would have almost been the default, the quote-unquote easy option, although it's never an easy option, look maybe not quite as appealing as it was before. What is interesting to note is on a relative basis, emerging life sciences companies in Europe have held their value relatively better as compared on average to their US peers, and that is driven by the different types of investor bases that we still have between Europe, the UK, and the US. I think the debate is a little bit early to predict for UK life sciences. I think until you have a certain critical mass in a market where over the last 2 years there's been a huge increase in activity, but I still don't think we've reached the point where there's enough companies coming to market, in particular to give the generalist investor an opportunity to build a portfolio of positions as opposed to taking single large positions. It's still very difficult to compare sort of like for like across the two markets, and quite a challenge.
Darrin, go on.
I'd like to just come in on that. I think that is absolutely true. In order to solve this emerging trillion-dollar healthcare market requires companies of lots of different disciplines, from sequencing, which we've seen over the last number of years, through gene editing, through classical drug discovery development, genomic medicine, all of those areas. And in order to have to expose yourself to all of that, there needs to be a critical mass of companies. And I think there's that combined with, so there's the scarcity of the opportunities, but also the thinking of the investors. The tendency is to try and find unicorns. And I said this at the stock exchange, there are no unicorns. And the danger of actually finding a unicorn and giving that 100x return is you think you're the unicorn spotter. And then you then start trying to convince yourself you're seeing unicorns everywhere. When in reality, it's pretty straightforward. There are a whole series of vertical opportunities. So if you look at gene editing, you wouldn't just invest in the first wave of companies, because science tells us we solve the early problems first, etc. They're the ones that are tractable. But there's always loads of horizontal problems that need to be solved underneath of that. And so you need to invest quite broad and deep in each vertical across this value chain, whether it be big data, all of these things that are going to contribute to this sort of outcome. And then you need to also invest in horizontal companies, and I would say Horizon is what companies trying for its sins to be a horizontal problem solver. And if you invest across all of those, you can get the result. Look at the US between 80s and 90s, $50 billion went in to the first and second wave companies. And those top five by market cap, Amgen, Biogen, Genentech, etc., returned $111 billion to investors. Hundreds of companies failed, but they also left 1,000 companies in Boston, San Francisco, La Jolla, etc., that created an infrastructure and that critical mass to invest in. If you tried to pick the one, British Biotech, the clue's in the name, that's a portfolio of one. And if you left holding the baby when it all fails, that you'll still get people when you're doing our IPO who wouldn't invest in Horizon because they lost their backsides 20 years ago in British biotech.
So that brings me on to... yeah, go on, Russ.
Sorry, I was going to say, wouldn't it be great if you could invest in a portfolio of great UK science companies? But sorry, please carry on.
You're not allowed to sell on stage.
Yes, it would, Russ.
But actually, as well as doing a self-serving pitch here, but I think there are some generalist investors who have done something very smart. And if you look at the Woodford and Invesco kind of model, what they've done is they've invested in vehicles such as Imperial Innovations, IP Group, Mercia, the ones mentioned before, not only to make a return on the investments that they're making in those portfolios, but in order to observe companies coming through those early years and then can double up on those businesses as they become more established, and are then available to cornerstone and IPO if those businesses then go on to have ambitions to become public. And I think that is a really smart investment strategy for generalist investors. I hope they don't mind being called generalist investors, but I think it's a really smart way of bridging that gap. It is one tactic that some investors have started doing, and I think that's a really neat workaround.
So let's move a little bit in that vein of having a broad view. One of the things we talked about as we were preparing for this is the geographical aspect. So, academia is important. Liz, you highlight that in the report. That's very clear. If you talk to the historical guys in MIT, they would say, the big thing was the investor could walk from one investment to the next investment and get on the bike to the third investment. It was all very easy to have conversations, and you could feel and see the portfolio that you guys have described. So what are your views on our geographical structure? I mean, we have clearly Oxford, Cambridge, London. You could say we have Scotland. How is that working? And is physical proximity still important? Or with technology, is that becoming less so? And it's open mic. Grab it, go for it.
I've still got the mic, so I'll carry on talking. I think we think at Imperial Innovations proximity is really important for two reasons. One is that point of deep mining research institutions, so you do understand.
There was always one, isn't there?
On the panel. Adam on the panel.
But also being really close to those companies in their formative stages to be able to be on hand and be responsive. But I think the other dimension we need to overlay, and Liz, you touched on this, which is management talent. Because this is hard enough to do as an investor where you can attract really great management teams to your companies. And I think if you try and do that over a geographically dispersed area, it becomes harder. Imagine us trying to do what we do in Germany or France or Italy. There's great science there. I'm sure there's great management talent, but we compound our challenges to try and do it. So I do think proximity is important as part of our model.
So I think that we shouldn't let universities and early stage grab the innovation limelight, because it isn't all about that. If you understand this sector, then the beautiful thing about pharmaceuticals and healthcare is that if you look at all of the molecules that have been used to treat health over the last 40 years, and you go back when they were first developed, most of those molecules, we got the mode of action wrong. We didn't understand how that molecule actually treated the disease. And if you go back and look at those and you follow how they're being used today, predominantly off-label by clever clinicians that have worked out actually it treats a different disease better than the one it was licensed for, you can quite often be innovative with molecules that are 30, 40 years old. And that's partly what the Clinigen model is. We look at revitalizing molecules. It isn't all about identifying new things. It's about going back and reinventing old things. If you look at another industry, one of the most successful automobiles has been the Mini, the reinvention of a very old car. And that's, you can reinvent a lot of disease treatments by actually understanding how they work rather than assuming you know how they work.
Or the Apple Watch reinventing this thing on my wrist that tells us.
That's not a good idea. I have no idea how that works at all.
So I'm kind of in the middle of these two positions. The UK is not that big that we should be looking at it as a load of disconnected cities and centres. One of the strengths of having an ecosystem, and I'll use Cambridge as an example, is you've now got a global pharmaceutical company that's embedding itself at every level of the science base across all of these disciplines. It's investing, hopefully co-investing with funds like Russ's at Cambridge Innovation Capital, and you've got enough push in all the key disciplines now. You think of the great inventions of physics that's come out, the inventions of mathematics, the computer science, now the genomics, etc. All of these things that need to feed into that horizontal value chain are available there. But they're not only available there. They're available at different universities. Maybe there's a higher density of innovation there that comes out. So the strength of having that sort of ecosystem, I think, is undoubted, especially with the capital. But one of the weaknesses of the UK in terms of the emerging model, it seems that every major centre wants to be fully integrated and have every capability. So Cambridge wants to have full-scale manufacturing in life sciences and this, that, and the other one. It may not be the best at doing that. Maybe the Northwest is better at training technician staff and manufacturing staff, etc. And then you've got everywhere who's, in the north, who's got manufacturing bases. They've got great universities too, but they want to be Cambridge as well as on top of being a great manufacturing. And what we need to do, I think, is look at how we use all the expertise we have around the country to create businesses that are distributed through the UK. They may have headquarters for innovation in areas like Cambridge, but manufacturing set up in the northwest or in northeast or in Scotland, etc.
And I think this, we talk about this a lot, but I like that model. The integrating the UK model, I think, is highly attractive, and the UK and Ireland to some extent. And if you think about the longest flight you could take within the UK and Ireland is irrelevant compared to the northeast or of the US, and so I agree. I like that idea, that concept. Something you touched on, and maybe Cailin and Liz, you could talk about this. The role of Big Pharma. So, Cambridge is an obvious one with AstraZeneca's investment, but Big Pharma, UK, can you talk about it? What do you think the opportunity is for biotech? And then the three gentlemen at this end, after that, I'll come back to you and talk about how has it actually worked for you, and what does that relationship look like? So,
Big Pharma is incredibly important in the UK for a number of reasons. The first is scientists. You have an ecosystem of scientists. You have an ecosystem that's supporting science in universities. You have an ecosystem for training scientists and salespeople and business development, some of whom come out to get involved in the bio industry, the wider bio industry. Second important aspect for Big Pharma in the UK is that actually they're incredibly important investors in early stage life science. Good example today is Mission Therapeutics, one of innovation businesses, raised £60 million with Roche, SR1, Pfizer, Sofinova, but they're not Big Pharma, but SR1 being collected. So they're incredibly important, and they're also incredibly important for the more international aspect, bringing science and scientists in and out of the UK, bringing management talent in and out of the UK, and that's very important. We see a lot of people who've come out of Big Pharma being fed up with it and want to start biotech, and they're often extremely good presenters, understand the finances, understand about how to communicate to generalist investors, but maybe they have to learn how to deal with small companies.
I think I would echo that in terms of having a fungible and broad talent pool that can move across between bigger organizations and smaller organizations. They play clearly a critical role in the UK, Switzerland, obviously in the US and other major markets as well. I think maybe, where one of the sort of gaps that the UK still has relative, obviously, to the US in particular is the bridge between sort of big pharma and biotech is still very big. We don't have this group of mid to large or large biotechs, which is sort of in between. And we also haven't reached the stage where we have a series of serial entrepreneurs that have gone out, moved either from Big Pharma or Biotechs and serially started and created businesses. And a lot of what investors, coming back to the proximity point, for an early stage development company, and Russ and others could comment here, it's as much about the people as about the science. And I think in order to sort of really bridge the gap further, we need to have teams that have done it successfully, that when you're going on the road can tell investors that they've done it before, which a lot of the US stories which people look to where, you know, they're companies that have billion-dollar valuations as private companies, these are management teams that have done it before, and I think we still need to develop that to some degree. And I think Big Pharma, in terms of resourcing and talent, has an important part to play in that.
Thanks. And so maybe we talk about your real-life experience and the ups and downs and how it's worked with Big Pharma. Russ?
Yeah, I was going to chip in with an example of our relationship with Johnson & Johnson, which started 5 years ago now, around that, when they bought one of our portfolio companies, Respivert, and actually talking about the flow of management talent between organisations. I think Paul Stoffels, who was the architect of buying that business, himself had run a biotech company before, and then found himself working for J&J. So he wanted to bring external innovation into Johnson & Johnson. And I think they were so impressed by the pace at which Respivert had developed in its first 3 years of its life that they wanted to keep that business on our incubator in our campus. And then spun out some technology with us to form another company, Topivert, and then we collaborated on a third and a fourth. So we've now got 4 companies in common with Johnson & Johnson Innovation. It is delicate dealing with these large organisations because they are very powerful. They do have processes and such like, which are delightful to work with. But what they also bring is real insight. So their clinical teams can help look at an early stage company and work out what data needs to be produced in order to get to a proof point, or how to design a certain set of trials in order to answer key questions. So that level of insight is really helpful to us as an investor, but also to our portfolio company. So they're definitely part of our ecosystem.
Very good. Peter, do you want to add to anything?
Well, you could argue that Big Pharma is the specialist healthcare investment sector, because that's what it does. It's Nova Fund, Roche, Pfizer, AstraZeneca. That's what they're doing. They're identifying that what they're not good at is ideas generation. What they are good at is getting something to the market and helping you get it on the market and then commercializing it when it's on the market. And then they become bad again when it's on the market at realizing how to get its full potential from its full life cycle. So you've got people at the beginning of that cycle, such as Russ's company, and then you've got people at the end of that cycle, like Clinigen, that live off the crumbs that fall off the table. And there are so many crumbs that fall off the table, it looks like being eating very crumbly pastry most of the time. So, and they're good at commercializing, they're good at investing in ideas. I think Big Pharma's bad at everything else, frankly.
Wow. I'm going to come in and take that from 2 ends, because I'm trying to hopefully put something to wrap around this. But if we start from, with Horizon as an example for this, there were two stages where this was really important. At the beginning and going public. So at the beginning you had a management team who had already done it before, and especially including Jonathan Milner, who built Abcam and was a significant investor in the business. And then we had Genentech and then Roche in at the beginning. So they did 2 things. They knew we have still $10 million to sequence a genome. So to pressure what this business was going to look like in 2, 3, 4, 5 years was kind of ridiculous at that stage. So they knew it would probably have to change 3 or 4 times as we went along. So they were patient in terms of that. So it was the patient capital. And then through the phase, eventually of bringing venture capital in quite late and then going public, having them on the shareholder register gave a very significant endorsement to the technology, et cetera, and the team that built the company. So I think that was one. Coming to Peter's point about, we talked about talent earlier. I mean, AstraZeneca has moved to Cambridge. There's other examples of Big Pharma going and move near to universities. In my experience, the strength of the UK is also the weakness. 11% of innovation is coming out. That means you've got a lot of postdocs. and a lot of scientists, not necessarily a lot of people with industrial experience, and people tend to want to either work in postdoctoral research in somewhere like Cambridge, or they want to go to a big pharma. Now, there hasn't been a big pharma till recently, so we, for example, built a lot of our services and products businesses on people who would naturally have been postdocs, who we then trained to be disciplines, scientists, services, etc. Now, with the availability of a big pharma, there's a big draw for people to go back into the safe, warm fold of an extremely well-funded company where accountability comes somewhere down the line when a drug fails, etc. So I don't think pharma is the solution for resourcing biotechs. And this is where we need to use the other regions. Hiring technicians with 10 years experience or with magic hands in the lab is almost impossible. Yeah. There are better places in the north, the technical university in the north, and other places where I trained as a technician. That's how I got back into science after leaving school very young. There are very few people who have got those magic hands, and I struggle to hire them. I find it much easier to hire their PhDs, postdocs. Sorry.
Interesting. So I'm going to ask you one more question as a panel, and then we're going to open it up to the floor. I'm going to give you some warnings so you can come up with some good questions if you haven't already. So I'm going to finish as we started with our beloved George. So he's very upbeat about the UK and the biotech sector and life sciences in general, as you would expect. What more could he be doing, either from regulatory, encouraging capability build, encouraging inflow of capital? What advice would you give him as the Minister of Life Sciences? I'm buying you some time just to think, because I didn't prepare you for that question. Liz, as you wrote it, let's start with you.
Thank you. I get the short straw, starting fast. What would I ask George Freeman? What would be on my Father Christmas George Freeman wish list? Yeah. Well, some way to fill the funding gap, so that companies that come to the UK market are bigger, are more attractive to generalist investors, are more understandable to generalist investors, because I think that will bring a virtuous circle of investment into UK and grow the sector as a whole. So some way to fill that from the early stage, from the catalyst, from those sort of early stage funding, which is going quite well in the UK, so that space in the middle, that Series C, Series D, I'd like him to wave his magic wand, open his Christmas sack, and support the community to invest there.
I'm happy. I absolutely echo that. I think to attract a broader group of generalist investors to make healthcare a part of their portfolio, where it's perceived as risky or different or hard to understand. I think there's ample place for additional incentives, and be it like France, where there are tax incentives if you invest in SMEs for a 5-year period of time, something along those lines I think would have significant benefit in terms of attracting a broader group of investors into the late stage and also the newly IPO'd companies.
Well, sorry, just wanted to pick up, and that's one side of it. One of the other conversations is first in human. How easy do we make it? I'm not leading the witness too much as we come on to the rest of you, but I wouldn't mind hearing, in case you don't pick up on this, that NHS pricing, does that make it, how does the ability to access patients, first in human, NHS, as well as funding, what more could the government be doing to help?
I'll duck that one and leave that for my two colleagues on the left. I actually wanted to shine a very sharp spotlight, and this is real minority interest, but I think it's actually really important, which is that the government have come out and said that they're going to protect the science budget, which is great. There's also a very small budget, but a very important budget, which is about translational research. So this is relatively modest pockets of capital that are able to provide grants to get that research into the format of where the science is investable, and areas such as high funding for those that are interested in this area. But it's something that the government, although it can talk about the big headline numbers, there's little pockets that might fall between cracks in BIS or whatever that I think are really important to protect as well. So that's part of our ecosystem that we should pay attention to.
just answering your first question first, what could our beloved George, as you call him, do? He could support the Stay in the European campaign, for one, as far as I'm concerned. And then moving on to your second question about first in human, if you look at the recent press around the issues in France recently, then one of the beautiful things about the UK is the way that we've regulated within our first in human trials. That couldn't have happened in the UK. And that is just another indication about why the UK is bloody good at what it does.
Yeah, I think there's another thing. If you spoke to George, I think Steve, you probably know this better than I do. Is his priorities are feeding, fueling, healing, and all the companies and technologies that serve into that. I think we've got to cut ourselves a break. I think the government's done a remarkable job over the last, starting with the last government and this government as well. There is now an incredible pull from the early stage innovators. There's all the tax reliefs, the patent boxes, all the various things like that. UK Innovation Investment Fund. You've got the Catapult investments. You've got the TSB, all the Innovate UK, all of those various different initiatives. I think there is, creating scalable business is about keeping alignments of interest for long enough so that you can build those businesses. Otherwise, the temptation is always they come to a natural endpoint because founders hate each other, the investors control the business, they just want to sell it. But if you can create alignments of interest all the way through, you'll get that. And the last area of alignment, I think, is in that later stage area of funding. So if somehow you could, now I hate to say this as an EIS investor across a lot of different businesses, but you now get into the stage where that capital isn't aligned with the venture capital that's coming in. You get ridiculous valuations that set the company up for failure, to let down the incoming larger investor, and then you get down round valuations, all these kinds of things. Everyone gets upset and with each other, etc., and they all run out of steam eventually, and they'd rather sell the business. So you've got to keep those alignments of interest of capital longer. So I'd like to see them aligning the EIS and the venture capital better. The other thing I'd like to see them do is incentivize venture capital, for example, to hold longer. There must be a tax incentive program that can be structured so that if they're supplementing with UK Innovation Investment Fund money, they're topping up venture funds, etc., that should come with some form of incentive to keep businesses growing so that the government's ambition of scalable businesses that employ people can become a reality. I mean, it's not difficult, right? The reason EIS works is because there is a massive downside protection, so it becomes a lot easier to invest in 30 companies. If you make it a lot easier for people to hold on to shares for longer and build bigger companies, they will do it, but economic incentives are needed.
Very good. Before we open it up to the floor, I'm going to ask you at the end to just give a 30-second summary, not an introduction of yourself, but a summary of your key messages to the audience. But while we allow them to buy some time to think about that, let's open up for any questions. Can I ask you to raise your hand and then wait for the microphone to arrive? We have a question here.
Fintan Walton from Pharma Ventures. Hi. I suppose the elephant outside the room is the European Union. And in part, we see ourselves in the UK as 70 million people. We share a continent in part, which is the European Union. We've got numerous stock exchanges out there as well competing. So the real question is, I think personally that the UK done extremely well. So the next big question is, of course, is how are we going to do if we stay inside the Union or outside the European Union? And from a pure biotech point of view, are we better in or out of the European Union?
Now, just so we can get through plenty of questions, I'm going to ask one or two of you, unless you're all desperate to comment, and you just go for it.
Well, I think I might have laid my cards on the table already. You've got to think, we're a commercial organisation. I want to be in the biggest market possible, and I want to have the strongest incentives behind me. And it doesn't matter whether we're commercialising or developing. You don't develop a medicine for a single population, for a single gene group. You're developing a medicine, a treatment for a worldwide population. So you have to look beyond your borders in everything that we do. And it just seems utterly crazy that we would look at our own belly buttons at a time when the world is looking for opportunities. And as far as the investment goes, London is amazing. And if you look at the factors that Liz has put in the report about the UK and its relative size compared to the rest of Europe, it's a compelling argument that it could, if it stays within the European Union, actually become the dominant player. That's what we've got to do, is we've got to stay and we've got to dominate, because I think if we stay, we'd actually suck more. The thing that's allowing everybody else to develop other stock markets and other opportunities is the fact that we keep pontificating as to whether we want to be in or out. So I'm glad that we're having the vote, and I'm very, very hopeful that we'll do the right thing, but time will tell.
If I could just come in as well, a company like Horizon and other companies I'm involved with, 95% of our markets are outside of the UK. We're international companies from day one, so we have to have access to the biggest possible markets. To throw a crumb to those Eurosceptics, would Britain survive outside the European Union? And would the people in this room with PhDs, degrees, etc., do fine? Yeah, we'll probably do fine. We'll probably do fine in any environment. But the reality is, these big problems in healthcare, for example, is going to become the biggest problem. The affordability of healthcare require cross-border solutions. And I would rather see Britain, as Peter just said, be the California of the United States. It's not a separate country, etc., but it dictates who wins the presidency, typically, and various things like this, and had the most influence and most power. But you're not going to do that if you sit inside moaning all the time about how hard done by you are and thinking about the days gone by. We need to be in there, constructive, and naturally our innovation, our capital markets, all the things that we're very strong at will get us a leading seat, but they won't give it to us if we're constantly misering.
Very good. And we're not going to go into Trump potentially losing in Iowa discussion.
Darrin wants Arnold Schwarzenegger, by the sounds of it.
So I was just going to give a plug to the European Investment Bank and the European Investment Fund as a big supporter of innovation and UK science. You may not appreciate the number of venture capital funds where the European Investment Fund has been a cornerstone LP, but look down their registers and you'll see that the EIF is a big supporter. The European Investment Bank is a substantial provider of capital to Imperial Innovations, and the EIF have joined with us to co-fund the UCL fund. So I think although there's lots of negative stories about what Europe does for us, they do some positive stuff too.
Liz, you grabbed a mic. Do you want to?
Yeah, my view is that the UK at the moment is well positioned. We're the prettiest person in the room in Europe, but frankly, if you've got nothing to compare it to, if you go out of Europe, you've got nothing to compare it to. There's no point in being the most attractive player, because nobody wants to come and be with you. Nobody wants to be your friend, because you're standing there by yourself in a room talking to nobody. And I think we are in a stronger position by being the centre of the honeypot than by standing by ourselves.
Very good. Thank you, Cailin. I assume you don't want to comment.
I think it's all been said. Thank you.
Any other questions? Time for a couple more, I think. Down here at the front. They'll bring you a microphone, then everyone can hear it. If you just introduce yourself as well, that'd be great.
Hello, I'm Monica from Advantage Austria, like the European perspective, I must say. And I was just curious about the role on Ireland, the Republic of Ireland. Most of the pharma companies were there, at least, that I know, regarding tax benefits and so on. And then my second question would be, pharma is a global business, so to be a little bit frank, who cares where the pharma business is, if it's in the UK, why not in China or the US?
I think I go back to the point made earlier about trust and ethics. So people do care about where you're based. I think they care about where the culture of the organisation is formed, and I think the UK has a great culture in trust and ethics in many industries, and I think that does help. And there are many countries, particularly in the pharmaceutical sector, where that is not the case, and it's been proven to be issues, and I think people feel uncomfortable about being based in those sectors, and frankly in many parts of the world people are uncomfortable about including data in clinical trials from some of those sectors. So it does make a big difference where you base. I think that is really important.
So, first of all, I want to give a shout out to Austria. One of the best things we ever did was the acquisition of Haplogen Genomics. Amazing science, amazing efficiency and drive. It's improved our manufacturing by tenfold, reduced cost tenfold. That's pure Austrian invention. And people won't know this because they don't have as good PR agents, but the other inventor of the CRISPR gene editing technique is also from Vienna. So there's great innovation elsewhere in Europe as well. But I think I'd care less about I care about a company like mine being a UK company, paying its taxes in the UK, employing people here. But for the rest of the organization, we have larger facilities in the United States. We have in Vienna. We will set up in the Far East, etc. In terms of the Far East, I mean, in terms of, I just not going to be setting up there just because I think ultimately it's not necessary. I've got lots of experience with people who've not made the savings they think they're going to make out there because of the costs and difficulties of doing business. Now, if you've got a particular market out there, and there are definitely some markets that we have out there in diagnostics and various things that may involve setting up facilities there, but moving half the operation lock, stock and barrel there to get a supposed cost saving is not something for us.
Yeah. Cailin?
I'll just comment again on the proximity point, because I think it is an important point. When one of the debates that companies, when they're looking at a listing jurisdiction, either in the UK, another European market, or in the US, the age-old question is the ability to attract US capital, which is by far the largest pool of capital, into a non-US IPO. And when we would go with our companies on the road, there are a number of investors, I would say it's the majority of investors, who geographic proximity and time zone, and being in the same time zone, are two very important considerations. And it does create a hurdle to investment. And it comes back to the earlier point that I think particularly for early stage companies, investors are investing as much in the people as in the science, and therefore the ability to frequently have access to those people is extremely important. So I do think the point around having centres, hubs with critical mass, where there's proximity to capital, to companies, is an important determinant of success.
Very good. Okay, we have time for, I think, maybe one or two, but let's go there in the back. Unless there's ones over here I'm not seeing because of the lectern. Yeah.
Hello, it's Sean Manning from Kesios. It's great to see the panel today, and congratulations on adding cohesion to the UK sector. Clearly, there's a lot of cohesion in Cambridge in the life science sector, and it's good to see that spreading outwards. My question concerns specifically investment. We're seeing increased levels of investment. I mean, look at the Mission deal announced this morning. But that in itself exemplifies the fact that, to a large extent, we're getting the same investors putting more money into the sector. And on one hand, that's a great thing. On the other hand, there are risks with that. And I wonder what the panel's views are in terms of diversifying the range of investors in the UK. Because many of the funds that are being set up recently are in fact fund of funds. So what are we doing to attract new capital into the sector to actually take the pressure off of some of the existing investors, which just seem to be piling more and more cash into the sector? That's not a problem as such, but how do we diversify that?
I'll put it on my to-do list. I mean, joking apart, I do agree with you, which is that we've got some phenomenally supportive investors in the sector, and they are creating this new asset class. And I think that's a wonderful thing. But we also, think it would be good to broaden out the number of investors and generalist investors, so that it doesn't become a minority interest, but actually spans out now into other investors as well. So I think you're right. I share your view that would be a good thing for the sector to do. I think one of the challenges that we've got to do is we've got to get those generalist investors educated and knowledgeable and informed about the companies that we're growing, so that they too want to come on board. So I agree.
And part of what started this whole process of getting this report together was exactly to deal with that issue. It was to try and get some facts and to blow some myths and keep repeating them and asking the 30 or so companies that got behind this report to repeat these messages in their annual reports, to repeat these messages when going on the road and meeting with investors, because we do need, you're right, we do need to attract new investors into it. And I think, you know, the banks need to think a bit more broadly instead of always saying, you know, these are the people that invest in healthcare. Well, why are they the people that invest in healthcare? If we're calling them generalist investors, which we are, then why do they not invest in healthcare? Let's explain to them what the sector is. Let's talk positively about what it is we can bring as innovators, as companies that are driving good growth in the sector. And there's some bloody good stories in this sector about growth once we've gone to the market. So it was about just giving a more positive aspect to everything that we do, and we're not, you know, we accept that we've, you know, in here there are our companies as examples, but it wasn't about that. It was about the market as a whole and getting positive messages out there and always talking about the positive. We've just not been good about it in the past, and that's what kicked this off.
So a couple of things. You know, I've already talked about how important the fund of funds type, and they're gaining a lot of attraction. Now that's really good, and I'm not critiquing in any way. But the danger is if we don't start educating people of the broader opportunity of investing in these verticals, these horizontal, this portfolio approach, in first and second waves outside of the fund of funds, they will just become lazy and only invest in the fund of funds. And I think there'll only be so much capital that will flow into there. So this point about analysts is really important. We have a relatively small number of analysts, and I think we need more new blood. There are a lot of programs now at universities. One at Cambridge, for example, that I teach on, the Masters in Bioscience Enterprise. These people have been in pharma, they've been in biotech, they come and do the MBA type things for the pharma sector. There's a couple now are here starting to be appointed, coming through. You know, we need to get a new wave of sort of analysts, and then we also need to teach people by comparison to the US, and not just comparisons of P/Es and EV sales multiples, but of the significance of companies. You know, Editas Medicine will list for probably about $650 million this year. You know, pre-revenue. It's only been going for 3 years, but people understand the value of what that will bring in terms of genomic medicine, and so people, specialists and generalists, are piling into those. They probably wouldn't do that over here. So we need to find ways of getting these guys to sort of look at capital growth rather than just earnings.
Liz?
Yeah. I'm going to give a bit of a defence of the city, having worked there for 15 years. But what I think, the biotech, I've had at least 2 or 3 conversations a week in the last 6 months since I started my own business, about how that people would love to get generalist investors involved. They're very keen. They want to communicate better. They're going to do better science. They're going to not come too early. They're not going to ask for money with every conversation. The generalist investor needs certain key parameters. They need liquidity. They need to understand the people. They need to understand the science. And so the biotech community has to give them a bit of help. Many of them do want to invest, but they're afraid. Get rid of that fear, get that education going, and help them to invest in you. Don't just ask for money every 5 minutes as well, because that gets pretty boring. It's like having a grumpy teenager who only ever comes out of their room when they want their pocket money. You know, have an interaction. You know, you're more likely to get your pocket money if you interact, if you liaise, if you speak to them about what they want. And the key fund managers that have been spoken about today are involved, are part of the conversation, and they're not just constantly being asked for things.
But also defending the investors as well. We call people generalist investors, and then I realised when talking to some of my generalist investors, who I love, by the way, they would often know more about Horizon Discoveries, about Imperial Innovations, about BTG, about Ergomed than I did. So I'm calling them generalist and assuming I'm a specialist, and I don't know as much about my sector as I should do, and that was part of our
self-criticism as well, that when talking about the sector, we probably need to stop just talking about ourselves. We need to talk about the other people that are bloody good in the sector as well, and use them as an example about why the sector's good, and stop becoming obsessed about just why we're good.
Yeah, 100%.
Maybe just a sort of, I think really the same point. I think there's a lot that can be done by the companies themselves in terms of profile and visibility and awareness. And whilst the gap is closing, when we look at the average company coming to market in Europe or the UK versus the average company coming to market in the US, the number of interactions and the length of interactions with investors in advance of the IPO is threefold for the average US company versus their European counterpart. So this point around going out to tell the story, not to ask for money, and starting that well in advance of any potential capital markets activity, I think is one of the most critical parts of the educational process. And to get all investors, generalists, specialists, the ones who are going to go out and do full due diligence, comfortable with the story and the risks, so that when you do eventually come to ask for money, they feel a lot more comfortable about the decision that they need to take.
Very good. So in closing, I think I feel very upbeat about the biotech sector. The report is fantastic. Thank you so much for your hard work on it. I'm going to ask you all to say we're in a great shape. We've got lots of opportunity. We're going to be here this time next year-ish, hopefully. And what's the one thing you'd want to see, having built on the great baseline we have, that would have happened by this time next year? So who wants to go first? No one's looking particularly like they want to grab there.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I've said it makes some challenges to the sector and some problems. I'm incredibly upbeat about it. This last couple of years since we went public and I've got involved with a lot more companies, understand a lot more of the public company sector, with BIA, CBI, all the various things, I always thought there was just a small number of people who really wanted to make a difference and make it better. And I've been really encouraged that there are actually a lot of companies, and particularly the ones I've met in the public markets, who actually don't see just themselves being successful. They realize they're going to be successful if they're in an environment. All evaluations will be suppressed if the sector isn't well understood by investors and isn't supported by investors. So that's the purpose behind doing a report like this. And if I succeed, Peter fails, or vice versa, great, we have a nicer house on the beach, etc. But however, the sector will be failing if companies don't deliver. So if I was looking this time next year, I would like to see a greater group of people presenting an aligned position through groups like the BIA, through other groups, etc., to policymakers, to the investors, etc. And I'd like, instead of moaning about more analysts in the city or etc., let's help people, get them in there, additional people to support you guys.
Very good, thank you.
I'm happy. I think I do think that there's a huge amount, everybody here agrees, of great science, great companies that are being built. I think what I'd like to see, and notwithstanding that the next 12 months could be a little bit choppy in terms of the way that the equity markets perform, given what we've seen year to date. So I think what I'd like to see is some of the truly, truly great UK and broader European companies, and everybody in this room will know some of them, that are actually best in class, well ahead of their peers, not only in the US, but globally, quite frankly, in their space. Choose the UK as their listing destination, because I think for those companies, the capital, and there are examples, the capital will follow, and we need some of those companies to choose Europe, and to have a critical mass of, dare I say it, unicorns, because there are more than one. But we need some of these really sort of game-changing companies to list in the UK, and I think that will create, hopefully, a virtuous circle for everybody.
I've got two things, if that's okay.
Well, I'm not sure.
Maybe I'll just stick with one. I actually want good data. So we've got a couple of key pieces of key clinical trials with data that's reporting over the next 12 months in the UK. I mean, CAT, for Circassia being one, Circassia obviously being an innovations investee business. And actually, I want good data, because with good data, people get confident. I'm not saying I want everything to succeed, we're not going to have everything to see. We're not going to have great data from everybody. But I just want 55% of companies to report good data. And we just maybe get over that edge of fear and make people understand a bit more about that. The second thing I want is mid-cap companies. Companies of a decent size to attract foreign investment who don't care where the company is domiciled. But then that again brings more money in. I don't want every single mid-cap company to be bought by the US or the Japanese or the Europeans because of the valuation differences and because the science is great and because they're good management. I want them to stay in the UK.
Very good. Peter, you're going to have to be brief.
I'd like us to see us focusing on the positives more and talking up the positives. You know, amazing when you look at things like the Woodford Fund and how they've transformed the way that people look at this sector and the publicity that they've got. You know, we don't sing the praises of things like that often enough, and fortunately they're not an investor in Clinigen, but hey, it's still it's an amazing thing, the way they brought the focus onto this sector. So let's all praise that and be proud about the really good things that we do and pick them up and carry them forward and stop being negative.
Very good. So in closing, Terry and Neil, it's easy for next year. We want a greater group of people here, a broader group of people. We want the UK as being chosen for IPOs. We want great data. We want some mid-cap companies being successful. We want to be talking about the positives. And I would like to add, I really like the idea of a connected UK and Ireland. That would be great. So if you could achieve all of that before next year's conference, that would be fantastic. I want to thank, and really thank, because it's been fascinating, Cailin from JP Morgan, thank you so much. Liz, actually it's not Liz Klein Associates, it's
Klein-Edmonds.
Anyway, we all know you. That's fine. Russ Cummings from Imperial, Darrin from Horizon, and Peter from Clinigen. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for listening.